Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for being with us today. So we are having a pediatric critical care web series, and I would like to thank you on behalf of Rainbow Children's Hospital to be, attending this session during the lunch time. So today, what we are going to speak about is how to manage a child who comes to a hospital, and especially in a ER as well as in the pediatric intensive care, when a child is continuously having seizures. So to go through this, I have today, panelist Dr. Rashmi Adiga. She is our pediatric neurologist, as she has tremendous experience, and she's been trained from UK. She was a consultant before joining us, and she has done a lot of presentations nationally and internationally, and she is well known in the city of Bangalore now. And she has also presented various papers in childhood epilepsy and neurology topics. So I would like to welcome Dr. Rashmi for this topic. The next speaker is Dr. Madhusudan. He is a pediatric intensivist. He's joined us over the last 1 year. He is trained in pediatric critical care from Chandigarh PGI. I would like to welcome Dr. Madhusudan. And we have the last speaker who is Dr. Sridhar, and he's been with us for the last 4 to 5 years at Rainbow Children's Hospital. Prior to that, he had worked as a pediatric intensivist at Fortis Hospital. So he has tremendous clinical experience, and he is one of the well recognized pediatric intensivist in Bangalore city. So I would like to welcome Dr. Sridhar also. So how we are going to do today is we're going to start how you're going to take uh, uh, the presentation, and as we go through, each speaker is going to discuss in detail about everything. So just to start with, we know that status epilepticus is estimated to be around 17 to 23 plus episodes per 100,000 children, and the mortality varies as much as 15% to 43, and out of them 10 to 40% of them develop refractory status epilepticus. What is important is to assess these children and to see what is their long-term prognosis. So this is a paper which has been published recently. And if you look at that, what is important is the cumulative incidence of epilepsy is around 25%. And most of these children, if they have a pre-existing neurological illness, they will have a long-term mortal and intellectual disability. So it is important to see these babies and assess them and probably prognosticate, to what they are going to be in long term. And for that, you need to have a detailed evaluation. So what I'm going to do is outline two case series, which these cases were managed in our hospital. Dr. Madhusudan is going to speak about initial emergency supply stations. Rashmi is going to speak about how to manage a child with epilepsy, especially in case if the child has refractory status. And Dr. Sridhar is going to touch base with most of these babies who present in ICU. They can have multi-organ dysfunction and how to manage that. And we'll conclude this, and we are open to the questions at the end. So coming to the first case, he was a 2 years, 8 months old child, a known preterm baby, weighing 950 grams. He was known to diagnose to have global developmental delay and microcephaly, and he was started on L-carnosine a few days back by a local doctor in the city. And then he presented to our emergency with focal seizures with deviation of his eye to the right side, and he was continuously jerking for more than 60 minutes. I'm just briefly telling, and I think as we go, we'll discuss more about this case. And case number two is a 10-year-old child, entirely different age group, having normal developmental milestone. He presented with fever and headache. Then he started to have few episodes of seizures with altered sensorium. Then he continued to have multiple episodes of focal seizures, and finally he was admitted into a PICU. And how we manage this kid is what we are going to discuss. Now, I would like to, start the discussion with Dr. Madhusudan. Probably, Madhusudan, you can take over from here.
Thank you, sir. Should I start my slides then?
Yes, Madhu, go ahead.
Yeah, are they visible now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So stabilization is a very crucial aspect in any child coming with a neurological emergency, because we want a neurologically intact, a meaningful survival rather than mere survival. And prevention of secondary injury, which can occur because of a number of factors, is the essence of neurointensive care. And at every step, time is very crucial. So the challenge in any child coming with status epilepticus or raised ICP or any neurological emergency is to simultaneously stabilize, evaluate, and manage. So by evaluation, we mean clinical evaluation as well as certain important investigations which can change the initial management and alter the outcome. So this is one area where stabilization, evaluation, management has to go on simultaneously in the emergency. As with any other sick child, the primary goal would be to stabilize the airway, breathing, and circulation. So, in a child who has come seizing to the emergency, it would be important to first position the child so that he does not sustain any injury because of the seizures. All the simple measures to maintain the airway, including head tilt, chin lift, suction, or an oropharyngeal airway, can help. It is important to think of cervical spine injury and take the necessary precautions at this stage in the setting. And all children would need to be started on high flow oxygen by a non-rebreathing mask. And if they are not breathing well, then bag and mask ventilation would be required. In the circulation, it is important to note that a child with prolonged seizures can have dehydration, or some of them may be in shock, or especially when they have already been treated with benzodiazepines, they can go into shock. Some of them may be because of the status epilepticus itself, or sometimes because of raised ICP, they can be hypertensive also. So it is important not to treat the hypertension initially when we are not sure of the cause. So getting a good intravascular access, or in those cases where it is not possible, an intraosseous line is very important. And the second step would be to assess the level of consciousness, where we use the Glasgow Coma Scale or the ABPU scale. It is important to remember that younger children need to be assessed slightly differently. And whenever in doubt, it is better to record a lower score rather than a higher score. So to sum up the first two steps, in any child who is hypoxemic or in hypoventilation or with poor airway reflexes, or with a Glasgow Coma Scale of less than or equal to 8, it is very important to intubate such children to protect their airways at the outset itself. So traditionally, we have all learned about the rapid sequence intubation. Here it is important to remember that any such child, all these procedures like laryngoscopy, intubation or suction can cause sudden surges in the intracranial pressure. Traditionally, rapid sequence intubation includes pre-oxygenation, followed by pre-medications like atropine and lidocaine, followed by a sedative and neuromuscular blocker in rapid succession. And classically, there is a timed delay with no assistance to ventilation. But here in such children, there is a risk of hypoxemia and hypercarbia. So we follow a modified rapid sequence intubation where there is no delay and they are assisted with their ventilation with a bag and mask. And hyperventilation is advised when there is a feature of impending herniation. Drugs that are used include benzodiazepines and opioids. And earlier we used to believe that ketamine can cause raised ICP, but that is no longer true. So it is no longer contraindicated in such children. It's important to remember that we have to avoid using repeated or continuous neuromuscular blocker infusions because they can mask ongoing convulsive seizure. The third step would be to recognize and treat not just the seizures, but also two other things, which are raised intracranial pressure and reversible causes. Seizures need not always be convulsive. That is very important to remember. A child may have convulsed at home. The motor activity may have subsided, but there may be some subtle seizures like twitching, lip smacking, or eye movements, or just autonomic changes, which can be features of a non-convulsive status epilepticus, which also are equally important to be managed well. The other two things which we have to recognize, which may not be very apparent in the initial stages, is the presence of raised intracranial pressure and certain reversible causes. So coming to the first and the second line medications for seizures, we all know that the initial choice would be an IV benzodiazepine, which can be either diazepam or lorazepam. There have been studies which have compared the two. Lorazepam has a longer duration of action as compared to diazepam, but in terms of seizure recurrence, both have fared same. So there is no difference in terms of seizure recurrence between the two agents. If we are not able to get an IV line initially, it is important not to waste time, because intramuscular midazolam has been seen to be equally effective as compared to IV diazepam or lorazepam. The other options being intranasal or buccal midazolam or rectal diazepam. Here, rectal diazepam is the least effective of the other routes. Phenobarbital is of course for neonatal seizures. The other drugs which are used once we have given an initial dose of benzodiazepine, when the seizures are persisting, another dose of benzodiazepine can be repeated in the next 5 to 10 minutes. But after that, it is important to go to a second line drug after the first 10 minutes, which can either be phenytoin or fosphenytoin or valproate. Fosphenytoin, though is more expensive than phenytoin, is said to have lesser side effects, especially the injection site reactions and the arrhythmias. Valproate is better avoided in children less than 2 years when we are suspecting metabolic causes or when there is already a pre-existing liver dysfunction or a coagulopathy. So there is a lot of recent literature on using levetiracetam as the first choice in the second line drugs. There have been two very famous RCTs, the Eclipse and the Concept trials. Both of them failed to show levetiracetam being superior to phenytoin or fosphenytoin. So at this point, it appears to be a tie between levetiracetam and phenytoin, and both of them are equally effective when they are used in the right dose. So levetiracetam 40 mg per kg versus phenytoin 20 mg per kg, there has been no difference in managing in the initial management of seizures. There have been studies which have compared all the three drugs, one adult study and the other one which was extended to children and continued further, and one recent Indian study which was published in Indian Pediatrics earlier this year. All three of them conclude the same, that is, levetiracetam is not superior to phenytoin or valproate as a first choice second line drug in status epilepticus. Some important anti-raised ICP measures that we need to follow other than ABC and seizure control are to position the head in the midline and elevate the head into 30 degrees, use sedation and analgesia well, and to practice minimal stimulation and osmotic therapy with either hypertonic saline or mannitol. So other than controlling seizures, these are certain important measures which will help us control and prevent secondary brain damage. Important reversible causes at this stage would be to identify and treat hypoglycemia, hyponatremia, and hypocalcemia. The drugs and the dosages, I'm sure you're all familiar with. And two other important things which we follow in some populations are empirical thiamine therapy in children with nutritional deficiencies, especially adolescents, and pyridoxine, especially in neonates when the cause is not uh, certain. So these two therapies may not harm and may benefit some populations. So then we proceed to step 4, which is a focused examination, which may give us clues as to the cause for the status epilepticus. Some important points in the general and the systemic examination, not to forget the fundus. Step 5 would consist of some important investigations. Probably in all children, we would require at least a complete hemogram, electrolytes, which would include sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, and urea and creatinine, a blood gas, which will give us the ionized calcium as well, and depending on the case, a blood culture, liver functions, and rapid tests for dengue and malaria. Empirical therapy, any child coming with febrile encephalopathy and status epilepticus would require ceftriaxone, and in most of the cases acyclovir also, because at this stage it would be difficult to rule out herpes encephalitis. Anti-malarial in some cases. Scrub typhus of course has a very wide spectrum and is easily treatable, so it is important to treat them with doxycycline or azithromycin. Step 7 would be further investigations, would be a lumbar puncture, neuroimaging, and an electroencephalogram. Lumbar puncture would be advocated in all febrile patients who come with encephalopathy and status epilepticus unless it is contraindicated. So any child having clinical features of raised ICP or any focal signs or in profound shock, local infections or thrombocytopenia, in these situations, lumbar puncture would be contraindicated, where it would be better to get a CT scan done, which is easily available rather than an MRI. But it is important to remember, more than any investigation, the first priority is stabilization, and one would have to balance the risks of transport. So, other than in some specific situations, a CT may not add anything much. It is better to stabilize the patient rather than shift in a dangerous situation. So just to give you a neuroprotection checklist, of course, we continue the seizures, control the seizures first, but just as a mnemonic from A to H, A would be analgesia and sedation, B, bowel and bladder, catheterize all kids with raised ICP. Carbon dioxide levels should be maintained between 30 to 40 in children with raised ICP. The right decubitus and position, sodium, calcium, and magnesium, which can be a cause for the seizures or contribute to them. And not to forget potassium. Prolonged seizures can cause rhabdomyolysis and raise the potassium levels. Control the fever. Seizure control I've already talked about. And check and correct the glucose levels and the hemoglobin also. So to summarize, time is very crucial in such children. Time is brain. Etiology may not matter initially, but stabilization always does. First things first, stabilize the airway, breathing, and circulation. Think of the triad of seizures, raised ICP, and reversible causes. Seizures, especially the non-convulsive ones. The first line drug would be an IV benzodiazepine. If IV is difficult, IM, buccal, intranasal, or rectal would be maybe equally efficacious in such a situation. Second line drugs, there are options between phenytoin, fosphenytoin, levetiracetam, and valproate. The current evidence says that levetiracetam is not superior to either of these agents. And I've already told you about the neuroprotection checklist to prevent secondary brain damage and to ensure a better outcome. So with this, I would like to pass on the talk to Dr. Rashmi Adiga, who will tell us more about managing children with refractory status epilepticus.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Madhusudan, for the emergency stabilization, which is a very important part of managing children with status epilepticus. So I'd like to talk a little bit about refractory status epilepticus. So status epilepticus, we've heard lots of definitions from many, many years. It's a condition which results from either the failure of mechanisms responsible for seizure termination, which lead to abnormally prolonged seizures. So that's called as time point T1. And then after time point T2, it can have long-term consequences, including neuronal death, injury, and lead to long-term disability and all these things. So previously, we used to describe status epilepticus as any seizure which lasts for more than 30 minutes, or any seizures, many seizures without recovery of consciousness in between. So now we have gone, the ILAE 2015 classification has gone to look at time point T1 and time point T2 because different kinds of status epilepticus are different. So we classify definitions according to the kind of status epilepticus as generalized status epilepticus, focal, and absent status epilepticus. So if you look at generalized status epilepticus, these are children who have generalized tonic-clonic seizures or any kind of tonic-clonic seizures with loss of consciousness. So for these children, the time point T1 is 5 minutes. So this is the time at which you should start treatment. Because if you don't start treatment at 5 minutes, then it is likely that the seizure will go on for very, very long. I think we can hold off washing hands for a minute. So the time point T1, so after 5 minutes, that can go on for very, very long. So, and the time point 30 minutes is when, you can start having damage to the brain, which will start occurring at that point in time. This is an important point to remember because 95% of the seizures in children are usually less than 2 minutes. So if only 5% of the children will have seizures which last more than 2 minutes. So it's at 5 minutes you start treatment with generalized status epilepticus. I'm getting some disturbance. So if other panelists and staff can mute themselves, that would be good. Then coming to focal status epilepticus. So this is when a child has a focal seizure that is coming from one part of the body. So they might have right upper limb jerking, right arm jerking, right leg jerking and all that. So for this, the time point T1 is 10 minutes and the time point T2 is 60 minutes. So that means to say that you have a little more time when you have a child with focal status epilepticus. The next one is the absent status epilepticus. This is not very common. So these are children who have absent seizures. So basically, they do not have any motor problems with their seizures. They might just be absent. They might just not be responsive for a little while. So in these children, there is no urgency. So that you can take your time. And many of these children, it's better not to, sedate them or, go ahead and just jump on with the treatment, because the time point T1 for these children is 10 to 15 minutes. And many of these children, even though they have seizures for 2 to 3 days, they might be absolutely fine. So there's no point in going down the full intensive care with these children. So the ILA task force has made a very clear distinguishing between the three kinds of status epilepticus, so that we can take a call and we can, give the best treatment for these children. So classification of status epilepticus according to ILA. So axis 1 is semiology of the seizure. So you'll often hear pediatric neurologists and neurologists always talk about seizure semiology. We always think it's very urgent to find out what exactly happened to the child, or what is happening in the ER, whether the child is having generalized tonic-clonic seizure, they are stiff and they're jerking, or whether they are completely alert, awake, maintaining their airway, and occasionally they're having their absences. So semiology of the seizure is very, very important when you think about the further management of status epilepticus. With semiology, you can also have non-convulsive seizures. Now, as Dr. Madhusudan said, if you have a child who's had a convulsive seizure at home and they come to your ER and have a non-convulsive seizure, then it's very worrying. But if you think about those kind of children who never had a convulsive seizure, but who are only having a non-convulsive seizure, these are children whom you can manage quite easily without, all the intensive care and all these things. So it's very important to classify the semiology. So that's why the ILAE came up with the classification of semiology, because it's the convulsive seizures whom you need to treat with all the intensive care. Axis 2 is etiology, which I'll come into more detail. Axis 3 is EEG findings, and axis 4 is age. So as Dr. Madhusudan said, time is brain when you think about convulsive seizure or established tonic-clonic status epilepticus. So it's very important to recognize and treat a convulsive seizure. So refractory status epilepticus. So refractory status epilepticus is defined as status epilepticus which continues when both benzodiazepine and second-line anti-seizure medication has been given. So Dr. Madhusudan put up two very, very nice papers, which everybody has been referring to recently. So the second line medication could be anything, could be your fosphenytoin, levetiracetam, or valproate. But what you need to remember is that when you have used benzodiazepine and second line seizure medication, and the child continues to have seizures, that is when you call it as refractory status epilepticus. And this is not a very high percentage. Many studies have described. So this is about 23 to 43% of status epilepticus patients. And many times it has a very high mortality. So coming to axis 2 or etiology of the status epilepticus. So most of the time, the kind of children which we see in our emergency department come with status epilepticus, they have acute symptomatic status epilepticus. So this may be secondary to encephalitis, central nervous system infections, traumatic brain injury, stroke, and all that. You may also have children who have a pre-existing cause. So they may already have had HIE, they may already have had developmental delay, they may have already have epilepsy, and then they come in with status epilepticus. So these are the kind of children we should try and avoid them coming to the emergency department. So these are the kind of children we need to concentrate on and try and avoid them coming to the emergency department. Then you have this group of progressive encephalopathies. Sorry, are you able to hear me? Because I'm hearing a lot of background noise. You are able to hear me, correct?
We can hear you.
You can hear me. Yeah. It's a lot of background noise, so I don't know where that is coming from. Progressive encephalopathy. So this is a group of children who have a neurodegenerative condition or who might have an epileptic encephalopathy. And these children may present to your emergency department with status epilepticus. Then there is a second group which they have found. These are children who have your febrile seizures, but then these are not febrile seizures which stop within the 2 minutes, which I was talking about. They go on for very long. So they have febrile status epilepticus, but they do not have a CNS infection. They might have another neurological syndrome like Dravet syndrome or myoclonic epilepsy or anything like that. And the last group comes with unknown. So this is the axis 2, which is the etiology of status epilepticus according to the ILAE classification. Now, as I said before, so at 0 to 5 minutes, Dr. Madhusudan has said really nicely, you're going to go with your ABCD, airway, breathing, circulation, and neurological status. You're going to think about IV access, glucose, never forget your calcium, and all of these things. So if the seizures don't stop by 5 minutes, that's when you think about giving the 2 doses of benzodiazepines. So the 2 doses of benzodiazepines, it could be nasal midazolam and an IV lorazepam, for example, or it could be 2 doses of IV lorazepam. But what is very important to remember is that you should not try and give more than 2 doses of benzodiazepines, because incidentally, I would request the audience to mute themselves, because what happens if you give more than 2 doses of benzodiazepines is that often the children go into respiratory depression and they end up requiring intensive care. So it's always better to stick with just 2 doses. And following that, as Dr. Madhusudan pointed out, you have options between fosphenytoin, levetiracetam, and valproate. We use fosphenytoin in our Rainbow Children's Hospital. So that is the second medicine. And if you don't have any response to these 2 medicines, so this is at 0 to 5 minutes and this is at 5 to 20 minutes, that's when you go into refractory status epilepticus. So what are we going to do next? So the options are, now you have tried fosphenytoin. So for example, for our case 1, we tried fosphenytoin and it didn't work. She was still having seizures, and by the time she was transferred from a different hospital, it was almost 60 minutes. So we decided, because her airway was patent and she was well otherwise, we decided to give her levetiracetam on top of the fosphenytoin. So she had a response to levetiracetam after 2 doses of benzodiazepines and fosphenytoin. So there is an option to try the other 2 medicines if you don't have any other other problems with the airway or breathing, or you feel that, like this girl, we knew she had a background of HIE, she had microcephaly, we knew that she has a tendency to have seizures. So we had this inkling that a combination of medicines might help her respond to the medication. So that is our first child, and that was quite easy. So what are the other options? So if you have a child less than 2 years, always consider pyridoxine, because many of these children may have undiagnosed pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy and they may just respond to pyridoxine. However, if you have a child like our case 2, which Dr. Prakash had mentioned, a 10-year-old boy who was previously developmentally normal and then went on to 2 episodes of seizures with no recovery of consciousness in between, and then went on to have altered sensorium. Then after that, he just continued to have seizures. So this is when we went down the ICU route. So we went down giving him midazolam infusion. So he required midazolam infusions and stabilization on PICU. So their options come into midazolam infusions, thiopental, lidocaine, ketamine, all of which require ventilation and stabilization on PICU. And this is why it is very important when you reach this stage to consider the axis of ILAE and think about what causes might be there, so that you may try and see, for those children, you may try and see that you may be able to avoid, full intensive care for some of these. So coming up to axis 3, what is the role of EEG in PICU? So we have got this Nihon Corden portable machine at our Rainbow Children's Hospital in Bangalore. So we are able to record continuous EEG monitoring should they need it. So like Dr. Madhusudan was mentioning, if a child has had a generalized tonic-clonic seizure at home and they've come back to your ER and they are still not recovered consciousness, then an EEG can help you differentiate between encephalopathy and subclinical seizures. So this is a very important differentiation, because if you have subclinical seizures, then you may go on treating them. Whereas if you know the child has encephalopathy, then you don't need to keep giving anticonvulsants to this child. So this is something which your portable EEG machine can help you with. Now, if you think about the second child who required thiopentone induced burst suppression, then it is very important, in fact mandatory, to have an EEG, continuous EEG monitoring, because that will tell us how much burst suppression is there, how much thiopentone which we need to give, and all of these things. So it can help with that. In general, EEG can help with prognosis on PICU, So if you have sleep spindles and vertex waves in a child with encephalopathy, then you can be more reassuring to their parents to say that yes, your child will probably wake up. And there have been studies to prove this as well, to say that children who have the normal sleep structures on EEG are more likely to recover from their encephalopathy. Our portable EEG can also help with children with traumatic brain injury to know, whether they're having subclinical seizures. One, whether they have a pre-existing epilepsy which has caused them to fall and have the traumatic brain injury. It can be helpful, and of course, it can also help with brain death. So coming to the second child, so our second child had the 2 doses of benzodiazepines, had fosphenytoin, and then he was still having seizures. So he started having midazolam infusion. And with the midazolam infusion, he stopped having seizures for about 30 hours. After 30 hours, he started having seizures again. And this is our portable EEG machine, which shows the continuous spike and wave. You can see it here. And he continuously started having seizures again. So this is the time when we thought we should consider other treatment. So we went through many treatments with him, but I'll just go through this one because we went through thiopentone, which caused burst suppression of his seizures. But I'd like to mention that thiopentone will require a lot of multi-system PICU support, which my colleague Dr. Sridhar will talk to you a bit more in detail about it. So the second boy had a condition called FIRS, or febrile infection-related epilepsy syndrome. So this is a very distinct condition, and if you look up in fact on PubMed, you find that there are not many children with this condition. It's a very, very rare condition. So it's a very rare condition, and there is a parent group on it because it's so rare that there are hardly any children for you to do any randomized studies on how best to treat them. So this occurs in previously healthy school-age children, which makes it all the more very difficult, because it's very difficult for the parents to accept that their healthy school-going child has suddenly had a spurt of refractory status epilepticus. It's more easier when you know what the reason for it is. They have a preceding febrile illness. They don't know the etiology despite all the studies done. And seizures are notoriously difficult to control, and they are refractory to multiple medications. And some may respond to burst suppressions. However, we are very wary about burst suppression because we do not know whether the burst suppressing the seizure itself will cause neurological disability. Others may respond to ketogenic diet, which we also gave to our child on PICU, but this has a very high mortality, 30% mortality, and 66 to 100% have a residual intellectual disability. It's important to know about this condition because then then we can consider treating for it, and we can also be realistic about what we can and cannot do on our PICU. So what are the options if seizures continue? So the first thing you need to think about, so now you've stabilized the child and you have a child on PICU who's airway supported and all that. So now you have the time to think about the etiologies. So consider the etiologies. So the etiologies could be FIRS, it could be autoimmune encephalitis, or it could be any other epileptic encephalopathy. So if you're thinking about these sort of etiologies, then you have to consider giving intravenous immunoglobulins or intravenous methylprednisolone. So this is the sort of thing which can help with generally helping with refractory status epilepticus. We'd have to think about thiopentone-induced burst suppression. I showed you an EEG about that. However, this will definitely need multi-system support because thiopentone can cause hypotension and a lot of other problems. We can consider ketamine infusion, which we thought about in the other child. We can consider giving magnesium sulfate. We can consider anesthetic agents like propofol, which we deferred in that child because he had problems with his heart. We can consider ketogenic diet. So ketogenic diet is a high-fat diet, and it is very helpful in 1/3 of the children who have refractory seizures. And you might think, oh my God, what is a diet going to do on PICU? But this is something which we can very easily give via the nasogastric tube because we have special milks which can help with it. And it can take about 2 to 3 days to achieve ketosis because, as we all know, brain uses sugar and ketones. So using ketones in the brain can make some changes in the synaptic conductivity and hence help with the control of the seizures. We can also consider a lot of other NGT medications, which we did give to our second child. One is topiramate, which has been found to be useful. And we can also consider, I can hear some background noise. Request all of you to mute if that's okay. So we can also consider other medicines like clobazam. We also gave some carbamazepine and all the other things which can help overall with all the other medicines to see if we can control the seizures. So in summary, refractory status epilepticus is a neurological emergency, and the current clinical practice is challenged by the heterogeneous presentation and the multiple factors which are involved in the progression of status epilepticus to refractory status epilepticus. In certain etiologies, like I told you with the HIE girl, the best way is to manage is with, to give the right anti-epileptic medications. So if you think about, referring a child early on, if they have a etiology, and if you treat them correctly with the correct anti-epileptic medication, then you can avoid status epilepticus and refractory status epilepticus. So early referral, I would say, with symptomatic epilepsy to prevent status epilepticus may be useful. So with this, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Sridhar M, for multi-system support in refractory status epilepticus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashmi. I think we had a elaborative discussion about what are all the common causes of seizures and how we do initial stabilization and what are the new terminologies to classify the epilepsy. We learned about the new definition about refractory status epilepticus. But the important thing is after initial stabilization and understanding the terminology of seizure. So when we are managing a child with status epilepticus, that to refractory status epilepticus, we need to just support other organs when the kid is in the ICU, because status epilepticus is truly a multi-system disorder. Management of organ dysfunction requires knowledge of physiologic and resultant end organ changes when occurs during status epilepticus. That means the status epilepticus can damage each and every organ in the body, and the damage could be because of early complications of the status epilepticus, or it may be related to the treatment itself what we give, or it may be related to the prolonged intensive care management of the child. The common problem what we see, or the common the systemic problem we face, is the respiratory failure and hypoxia. It is a leading complication. It can happen even up to 80% of the status epilepticus patients. And again, it is an independent predictor of mortality. The common reasons why they get into respiratory failure and hypoxias, it may be because of apnea or respiratory depression. The apnea could be a part of seizure itself in younger, especially the infants. And it may be because of respiratory depression, because of seizure, or the medications what we give. Sometimes because of airway obstruction, they can have hypoxia because they may not be able to maintain the airway, or it may be because of aspiration of the vomiters and other thing they do during the status epilepticus. And again, important thing is it can be because of neurogenic pulmonary edema, which happens because of high catecholamine surge during this prolonged seizures. So whatever may be the reason, as a consequence, it causes hypoxia and hypercarbia. And this hypoxia and hypercarbia can affect the various organs in the body. First of kind is it causes neuronal injury, and it worsens the neuronal excitotoxicity, which is happening because of this uncontrolled seizures. It can worsen the rise in intracranial pressure, and it can cause further damage. Prolonged hypoxia can affect each and every organs, it may affect even the heart, kidney, liver. So it just gets into the multi-organ failure. So to handle this, the initial thing is the maintaining the airway by simple procedures like suctioning and using jaw thrust, supplementing oxygen, and elective intubation when GCS is low or when we feel the child is not maintaining the airway. And the other important thing is the targeted mechanical ventilation. What exactly means of targeted mechanical ventilation is ventilating a child, avoiding hypoxia, avoiding hyperoxia. That is important. And ventilating a child, avoiding hypocarbia as well as hypercarbia, because either of the extremes can cause poor neurological outcome. The other one more common thing we face in the intensive care is the cardiac dysfunction. So this is like a data from the adults. So 56% of the adult patients who had status epilepticus, they had stress cardiomyopathy. It's also called as Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy. It happens because of like high surge of catecholamines in the body because of the seizures, and that causes cardiomyopathy. And there may be a cardiomyopathy because of the hypoxia, because of apnea or whatever we discussed, the hypoxia, respiratory failure. Prolonged if it is, it causes hypoxic cardiomyopathy. Arrhythmias is also one of the reasons for cardiac dysfunction, which happens in up to 4% of the population. The other thing we see in status epilepticus is metabolic acidosis and medication related. This can add to the cardiac dysfunction. Some of the medications can cause myocardial depression, and the metabolic acidosis is one of the known risk factor for cardiac dysfunction. What happens when there is a decreased cardiac contractility or like too much of vasodilatation? That leads to decreased cerebral perfusion. And again, this perfusion can also be hampered to the other organs. That leads to again multi-organ dysfunction. So the important thing is to support the heart at this juncture. That is done again with judicious usage of the volume resuscitation and judicious use of vasoactive agents. Like if there is too much of vasodilatation, use norepinephrine provided like cardiac contractility is good, or using epinephrine when there is a cardiac contractility is depressed, or sometimes we use dobutamine. So by giving this titrated volume resuscitation and inotropic support, we had to maintain good perfusion pressure. The other important is cerebroprotection during this stage. All of us know there is an increased metabolic requirement from the brain because of ongoing seizure, as well as there is increased metabolic requirement from musculoskeletal system, especially if it is a convulsive status epilepticus. And at the same time, because of cardiac dysfunction or because of hypoxia, there is decreased supply of the oxygen and other metabolites which are required. And this increased demand and decreased supply leads to neuronal loss, worsening of the raised intracranial pressure, and worsening of excitotoxicity. So to handle this, the first priority is to control the seizure, management of raised intracranial pressure, which step by step already Dr. Madhu has discussed. And the most important thing is to maintain a good cerebral perfusion pressure. As per the age, there are various cutoffs of cerebral perfusion pressure. We need to maintain cerebral perfusion pressure. And there are two ways of managing raised intracranial pressure. One is like intracranial pressure targeted. The other one is cerebral perfusion pressure targeted. So a lot of studies have shown that like cerebral perfusion pressure targeted management has a better outcome. So in a nutshell, maintaining a good cerebral perfusion pressure is very, very important. The other problem we face in the intensive care is again acid-base imbalance. The kids can have metabolic acidosis because of hypoxia or because of like hypovolemia or because of like ongoing muscle action and the increased demand. And they may have even respiratory acidosis because of like a decreased respiratory dive or like apnea, these kind of things. So whatever may be the thing, whether it's a metabolic acidosis or respiratory acidosis, when the acidosis is like the pH is very low, that can cause even cardiac dysfunction worsening, and it can also affect the intracranial pressure. So to tackle this, it's always better to secure the airway early to avoid respiratory acidosis, and to start like fluid resuscitation at the early stage to avoid like to maintain the good perfusion and avoid this progression into the metabolic acidosis, and using vasoactive agents judiciously. And word of caution about sodium bicarbonate is like don't use soda bicarbonate until unless there is a cardiac dysfunction or pH is less than 7, especially when we are having a patient with CNS problems, because it can cause again like worsening of paradoxical it can cause like paradoxical CO2 retention in the brain and worsen the raised ICP. The other one more important organ dysfunction we face is because of prolonged seizures or because of some medications, there may be rhabdomyolysis, and it can cause like myoglobinuria also. In the back set of or in the set of like hypotension, metabolic acidosis, and hypovolemia, this myoglobinuria can cause acute kidney injury. So on an average, about 5 to 6% of the status epilepticus patients can have acute kidney injury related to rhabdomyolysis. The important thing in this is a thorough monitoring of the renal status, early control of the seizure with anti-seizure drugs, judicious use of neuromuscular blocking agent, especially if the seizure is convulsive, and adequate hydration, early introduction of renal replacement therapies when you're suspecting acute kidney injuries setting in. The other issues we face is related to the glucose metabolism. When the kid is having status epilepticus because of like increased catecholamine drive, they can have hyperglycemia initially, but if the seizure prolongs, later on they can get into hypoglycemia. whether it's a hyperglycemia or hypoglycemia, the outcome is very poor. So considering that, a regular monitoring of the sugar is very, very important. And if there is a hyperglycemia, use insulin and target maintaining sugar around 200 milligram per deciliter. And if there is a hypoglycemia, maintain adequate GIR and maintain sugars around like 150 to 200 again. The other problem we face is thermodysregulation in the ICU setups. Because of prolonged seizure, prolonged motor activity, the patients can have hyperthermia. So hyperthermia, all of us know that it increases the metabolic requirement for the brain and it worsens the brain injury. So again, the management was we have to control seizure aggressively, use paracetamol when temperature is on the higher side, use cold saline infusions. Sometimes if required, cold blankets can also be used to control the temperature. The other one more thing important is the physical trauma. When there is a prolonged seizures, there is always a risk for physical trauma. And in a study, it has shown that almost 50% of the patients who are having status epilepticus, they have head injuries associated. The other physical trauma we face with this is like fractures, dislocation, especially the shoulder dislocation, and denture aspiration is one of the things. So here, we need to just protect the patients against the injuries and take care of this. Then the second part is the complication related to the treatment, what we use in intensive care. First thing is the decreased respiratory drive because of the benzodiazepine and barbiturates. So in this case, better to electively tube the child and take control of the respiration and ventilate with the targeted CO2 and oxygen. The cardiac dysfunction, again, it is because of the benzodiazepine. Benzodiazepines can cause vasodilatation, and they can cause a relative hypovolemia or a kind of shock, vasodilatory shock. And the cardiac dysfunction could be because of barbiturate, especially the thiopent and all. They can cause vasodilation, as well as they can cause primary myocardial depression itself. So in those cases, judicious use of fluid boluses or the fluid and judicious use of inotropic agents are very important. And the other complication we face is gut related, that is paralytic areas and gut microischemia and perforation, which are associated with barbiturates. So you have to be very careful when you're using thiopent infusion and all, about the gut, starting trophic feeds early, monitoring the gut movement, and even watching for any gut related complication like perforation and other things. And the barbiturates, especially the thiopent and all, when we use, they cause immunosuppression. Because of immunosuppression, the patients who are in the ICU, they are having high risk for infections. So that is why strict asepsis is very, very important, and regular screening or kind of a surveillance for sepsis is very important in these patients. The other one more thing often we forget is the propylene glycol toxicity. Propylene glycol is a solvent which is used in lorazepam and barbiturates. In cases of refractory status epilepticus, we'll be using infusion of these medicines. So that causes propylene glycol toxicity that is characterized by increase in osmolality, worsening lactic acidosis, hypotension, renal failure, and it itself can lead to multi-organ dysfunction. That is why whenever we are using barbiturates and lorazepam, we have to be ticking for these the findings which are coming up. If it comes up, it's better if you have an option, switch over to the other medications. The other one more complication we face is malignant hyperthermia, which we faced in one of our patients, the patient 2, where by using ketamine and inhalation agents, they can get into hyperthermia, hyperkalemia, all these complications. So that also we need to be monitoring when we are handling these patients. Then the third part, the complications related to prolonged intensive care. The first one is the infections. This may be VAP, central line associated bloodstream infections. It may be catheter associated UTI, and most of the time they all are multi-drug resistant organisms. The risk factor for this is Lyme's, invasive monitoring, catheters, and a lot of procedures what we do in the PICU. The management wise is strict asepsis, bundled practice we should do, remove the lines and catheter as soon as possible when you feel it is not required. The other complications we face is the bed sores, thrombophlebitis, and deep thrombosis. So the risk factors are prolonged ICU stay because of this refractory seizures, and not using DVT prophylaxis, especially in adolescent people. So the management wise, we need to change the position regularly, have a skin care properly, DVT prophylaxis, especially in older kids, and cannula site monitoring regularly. The one more important thing we see is a critical illness, myopathy or neuropathy, because of the steroids what we use in some of the subcategories of refractory seizures, like it may be autoimmune encephalitis, maybe fires, are using paralyzing agents when we are having asynchrony in ventilating these patients. And it may be like because of the prolonged ventilation, multi-organ dysfunction is a risk factor, because of like hyperglycemia. All these are risk factors for critical illness myopathy. So like how to handle this, take care of these risk factors by using like insulin, or like avoiding paralyzing agents, avoiding steroids if you feel it's unnecessary like that, and starting early rehabilitation in the recovery phase. And very important is to continue the nutritional support for these patients. So I think now we can go back to the case. Handing over to Dr. Prakash.
Thank you, Sridhar. You can hear me, right?
Yes,
Yes,
I
we
can
can.
hear you.
Okay, so thank you for all my panelists. I think they kind of nicely elaborated how to go about managing the case. So getting back to our case, the first case we started on regular levetiracetam, and this child was also started with L-carnosine, and this was started by a local pediatrician, and the child then came to us with further episodes of seizures, and that is the time where this child was admitted, and had we stopped that L-carnosine, then the baby was got recovered well, the seizures stopped, and this child is being followed up in our hospital and doing well. Unfortunately, the second case had intractable seizures. The family had issues in terms of continuing, because they were pretty sure, there's going to be long-term neurological devastation in this child. And they also were thinking of alternative medicines, and were contemplating whether we should start on some Ayurveda medications. And the child got discharged, and we came to know that this child passed away later on. So we all knew that these parents were counseled for poor prognosis in terms, as the clinical diagnosis was made as fires. So to summarize, what we have learned over the last half an hour, just a second. Okay, so to conclude, refractory status epilepticus is a neurological emergency, and which Madhu has clearly mentioned how to go about in case of neurological emergencies. The basic concept has to be understood and has to be implemented, and that is the key to the long-term outcome of these babies. So initial emergency stabilization is very crucial. We all know that there is various etiologies and multiple factors play a role in the progression of status epilepticus, and especially keeping in mind, this child might continue to have refractory seizures and needs to be addressed in a tertiary care. So a good intensive care support along with a pediatric neurologist is very important in managing these patients. And certain etiologies, when we know that, okay, this is because of electrolyte imbalance, we know that we treat that, these babies do well. And also one of the common things what we come across in our practice is infections. One of the best to diagnose early and treat is meningitis. So we need to start appropriate antibiotics. As Madhu said that, you need to give basic antibiotics and antiviral initially to see what this baby would land up in subsequent investigations. So we might not find any etiology, then that's a time where we have to think of other possible causes, like what Rashmi said about fires and autoimmune encephalitis or encephalopathy. So early diagnosis and referral plays an important role, and I'm sure this session was very useful for people who have attended. I would like to thank all the attendees who were with us for the last 45 minutes to 50 minutes, and we are open now for any questions. The questions can be asked to the individual. If you have any particular question to Rashmi, Sridhar, or Madhusudan, or myself. Do we have any chats as a questions? Can somebody see whether there's any chat?
No chance.
No chats, yeah.
No.
Well, it basically, if there's no questions, it means that our panelists were very clear in their explanation and everyone understood what to do. And I'm sure it has been useful to all of you. Let's keep meeting once again and keep learning new things. So I once again thank all my panelists, Dr. Rashmi, Dr. Sridhar, and Madhusudan for their time. And if there's anything, you can contact us. I think most of you can contact us. If you don't have the telephone, you can just call the switchboard and we are here to help you out. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.